Dear Tánaiste, dear Ambassador, ladies and gentlemen, also on behalf of the Freie Universität Berlin, co-organizer with us, we're very warm welcome here at the Hertie School to our first event in 2024. It's also the first event after the death of Jacques Delors. We've been really touched by the resonance and echo we got to his passing away. And I think it's very fitting to have the first event after the death of Jacques Delors on the institutional and political future of the EU and from an Irish perspective. Because I think it's fair to say that the period when Jacques Delors was Commission President was also an important period for the political and economic development of Ireland. Think of the single market, but also on the cohesion funds, the ability to invest in skills and infrastructure and opening the markets, including for US investment, which I think was very important for the development of the Irish economy. And it's remarkable if you look at the latest Eurobarometer, and I know the ambassador knows this very well, the latest Eurobarometer, the Irish are the citizens most optimistic about the future of the EU. It's 83% of Irish see the future of the EU optimistically, compared to 61% of the EU average. And I mean, I think that's not sort of natural in a way, if you think there have also been challenges to the EU membership. Think of the financial crisis, the euro crisis, but also think about the decision of the UK neighbor to decide to leave the EU. But I think it's also the way that you perceive the EU membership. And I have to say a credit to the way that you celebrated the 50th anniversary of the EU membership. I've seen you had an exhibition on that, and I was struck by particularly one panel where you describe Ireland as a sovereign state in the world, very much portraying the message that for a small member state, sort of pooling sovereignty is actually gaining influence. And that brings us straight into the discussion we want to have today, namely, to what extent some of the current challenges are challenging that concept of a voice within the EU that Ireland has. Because for security, mainly or particularly for security reasons, we're discussing an enlargement of the EU with a lot more member states. And for effectiveness reasons, we're also discussing an extension of qualified majority voting, which of course, in a way, diminishes the role of the individual member state, and maybe in particular of the smaller member states. And I think for that challenge, there's almost nobody better to discuss this than the Tánaiste, for the big experience and long experience that you have as a cabinet minister and also as Taoiseach, because you've been Taoiseach before as part of the coalition agreement with your coalition partner from 20 to 22, and you are now foreign and defense minister. You were before almost 10 years leader of the opposition, and before that also held many cabinet minister positions under Bertie Ahern and Prime Minister Brian Cohen, including also the position that you have at the moment, the foreign ministry between 2008 and 2011. So you bring a lot of experience and wealth of experience, and we're really happy to have you here. And I'm glad to give you the floor now, and then to open up to the questions here. And also, we will transmit this into the world by the recording will be made available to everyone that is listening to us then afterwards on the internet. So thank you very much. Very warm welcome.
Thank you very much indeed, Johannes. Thank you for your kind introduction to today's discussions, and to express my deep pleasure to have the opportunity to join you here today at the Hertie School of Governance in Berlin. I would also like to thank Johannes' colleagues at the Jacques Delors Centre, the Hertie School, for hosting us, and the Free University of Berlin for their role in bringing everyone here today. Obviously, it would be remiss of me not to start by paying tribute to the man whose name your centre so proudly bears. Jacques Delors was truly one of the great Europeans of the 20th century and a major architect of the European Union which exists today. He articulated a vision which was centred on promoting the best interests of ordinary European citizens, whether through the increased prosperity and greater economic opportunities, which resulted from the creation of the single market and the euro currency, or through the immense educational benefits and opening of new horizons resulting from the establishment of the Erasmus programme, an initiative first promoted by the then Irish Commissioner, the late Peter Sutherland. And in the Irish context, as you have said, the Cohesion Fund was particularly significant in terms of Ireland's development, but also the social dimension to his term, the investment in human capital, which was perhaps the most significant investment in Ireland that enabled the economic and societal transformation of Ireland itself. So we can truly say that Jacques Delors was a leader who understood the full potential of the European ideal and dedicated himself to realising it. And we are all in his debt. Amidst all the challenges and crises which Europe and the international community currently face, it is important to realise that the European ideal is one which continues to inspire people. It is certainly the case in Ireland, where just over 50 years after our accession, support for our membership and for the economic and social benefits which have flowed from this remains very high, as Johannes said, with a consistent 85 to 90% of people acknowledging European Union membership as positive. Later this year, we will mark the 20th anniversary of the Day of Welcomes, the day in 2004, when the European Union and the then Irish presidency welcomed 10 new member states. The enlargement process represented a natural and positive evolution of our union as the countries of Central and Southeastern Europe committed their future to a European Union based on peace, prosperity, and firm adherence to the rule of law. We know 2 years after the launch of Russia's brutal aggression against Ukraine that this ideal of a common European Union home is one which continues to animate and inspire our neighbours in Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia, and throughout the Western Balkans. This is why enlargement of our union is now the historical challenge with which we are faced, akin to the task of promoting greater economic and monetary union, which confronted Jacques Delors and his commission 40 years ago. My strong view is that we should not be in any way apprehensive about enlargement, given the geostrategic imperative which it now clearly is. Coming from a country which joined as part of the first enlargement of the then EEC in 1973, this perhaps is not so surprising. More seriously, though, the utterly transformative impact of EU membership upon Ireland can and should be seen as a positive advertisement of the clear benefits which can flow from enlargement. When Ireland joined in 1973, the big fear was that Ireland was too poor to make it within the EEC. Those were the arguments across Europe. They're not at the level that they'll survive or compete and so forth. And so enlarging our union to encompass the Western Balkans and our partners in the Near Eastern neighbourhood, in our view, will result in greater freedom, economic opportunities and security for all Europeans. And undoubtedly there will be major challenges in seeking to expand to some 35, 36 member states. The budgetary and policy implications will be very significant and far from easy. And that is why we agree fully that it is not only candidate and prospective candidate countries who need to prepare and undertake fundamental reforms, but also we as member states. The European Union will clearly have to adapt and in doing so address difficult institutional issues. Included in these is reviewing the Union's own capacity to act and ensuring that the European Union can continue to promote its values and exert appropriate influence on the international stage. As a smaller member state, we share the concerns of many of our similarly sized partners about the implications of greater use of QMV in areas such as the CFSP. However, we equally recognise that this is an issue which needs to be addressed and considered if we are to prepare for future enlargement. And that is why we took the decision late last year to become an observer member of the group of friends on QMV in Common Foreign Security Policy, which Germany took the initiative in launching last May. We should therefore embrace the prospect of enlargement and not fear it. Nor should consideration of any internal changes required in our policies or institutions impede the advancement of the accession process. There is clearly already considerable scope within the existing legal and treaty framework to reform our methods and equip ourselves for the historic challenge of potentially completing our union. If there is anything which can give us confidence that the European Union is up to the challenge of enlargement and reform, it is surely the resilience which our union has repeatedly demonstrated in confronting the whole series of crises which have arisen over the past decade or more, whether it be COVID, Brexit, or most recently, the appalling war on Ukraine. Our unity has been repeatedly tested as a result of Russia's unjustified and illegal aggression against Ukraine, but has not been found wanting. Indeed, no doubt, an assumption that this would not be the case was part of the original calculus by Vladimir Putin in launching his war. Our support for Ukraine will continue to remain steadfast and assured, and this includes the provision of financial and other support to enable the Ukrainian people to defend themselves. I earnestly hope that the extraordinary European Council on the 1st of February can arrive at some consensus or agreement on how to provide the €50 billion in multi-annual financing originally proposed by the Commission last autumn. Our resilience as a union has again most recently been demonstrated in the political agreement reached last month between the Council and the Parliament on the remaining legislative elements of the Migration and Asylum Pact. This is an outcome which Ireland warmly welcomes. I very much hope that all the remaining work to finalise the pact can be concluded under the Belgian presidency. They will have our full cooperation in that regard. Work is now underway within our Justice Ministry to review all the legislative elements with a view to considering the degree to which Ireland would wish to opt into the pact. No one will contend that the Migration and Asylum Pact is the perfect solution to what has been one of the most difficult challenges confronting the European Union over the past decade. However, it is firmly based on a recognition that the Union must act together in a true spirit of solidarity and responsibility if we are ever to address the situation in an effective, humane and appropriate manner. I'm also satisfied that the Pact sufficiently recognises the need to address the root causes of migration, to promote real and genuine partnerships with source and transit countries, and to remain firm in upholding our international legal obligations. For ultimately we are and must remain first and foremost a union based on those fundamental values of respect for human rights and the rules-based international order. Indeed, we cannot doubt that this remains a major part of the attraction for those states seeking to join or individuals seeking international protection in our Europe. And this is why it is also so important to uphold our values when addressing the current situation in the Middle East. The appalling acts perpetrated by Hamas on the 7th of October, or in launching indiscriminate rocket attacks on the people of Israel over many years, cannot be condemned enough. However, we must be equally firm and consistent in condemning the appalling, indeed catastrophic humanitarian situation inflicted on the people of Gaza over the past 3 months. The ordinary civilian population of Gaza should not be collectively punished as a result of the evils of Hamas. If the European Union is not consistent in how it responds to the appalling acts of violence perpetrated on entirely innocent people in both conflicts, then no amount of internal reform or institutional changes will undo the irreparable damage which we will and indeed may already be inflicting upon the European Union's international reputation and credibility. As we look now to the coming year, the challenges we as a union face are daunting but by no means insurmountable. This includes working to promote greater competitiveness and to complete the single market, the bedrock of our prosperity, which was the inspiration and legacy of Jacques Delors. On these and on so many other issues at European Union level, Ireland and Germany will continue to work constructively and imaginatively as like-minded partners. And this includes tackling the climate crisis, where we remain equally committed to achieving the ambitious targets which the European Union has rightly set for itself. Our relations with Germany, both bilaterally and as European Union partners, have never been stronger. This was visibly demonstrated at the recent COP28 in Dubai, where Germany and Ireland, through our shared membership of the UN Loss and Damage Transitional Committee, drove the initiative, which resulted in the agreement to establish the long-needed Loss and Damage Fund. In shaping the European Union's next strategic agenda, to be agreed by the European Council next June, I know that Germany and Ireland will again collaborate closely and constructively. We also look again to Germany as a true friend and partner in preparing for our own next stint as European Union presidency in the second half of 2026, where discussions within the Council on the next multi-annual financial framework, covering the period from 2028 to 2034, is likely to be one of the major priorities. We are fortunate in Ireland to know that we can always count on Germany's support and solidarity. This has been demonstrated in so many ways over the years, and not least in the solidarity which was always forthcoming in the period since the United Kingdom's decision to leave the European Union. Thankfully, European Union-United Kingdom relations are now much improved, though can never be taken for granted, and will continue to rest on full and faithful implementation of the withdrawal agreement and the Windsor Framework. And from Ireland's perspective, stronger and warmer, productive relationships between the United Kingdom and the European Union is essential, and is something that we strongly promote everywhere we can. My officials are also fond of reminding me that the joint plan of action, which Ireland and Germany have successfully and productively implemented over the past 5 years, offers an excellent example of how a large and small member state can cooperate to great effect. This should not be a surprise. Germany has always been mindful of its partners. I recall that it was the late Hans-Dietrich Genscher who, as foreign minister in the 1970s and 80s, would always say to his senior officials, when presented with the latest thinking from Paris, London or Rome, quote, "But what do the smaller members think? Small member states think." As Minister for Foreign Affairs and Defence, I am confident that Dublin and Berlin will always seek to instinctively know what the other is thinking, and will continue to work closely as like-minded partners in navigating whatever choppy waters may lie ahead. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Tánaiste, for your speech that touches upon so many important topics for the future of the European Union. We have about 15 to 20 minutes now for our discussion before we will open up the Q&A session to the room. And I would like to start, in fact, with the question of enlargement and reform. You have said in your speech that enlargement is the historical challenge of the European Union at this point in time, and that it must come with reforms. And I think there is a broad consensus on this, that there is a geostrategic need to enlarge and that there's an efficiency reason to reform. At the same time, both processes are sprinkled with veto options. It is not easy politically to, in fact, achieve either enlargement or reforms. So looking ahead also towards the next years, as a country that has been both very successful in integrating into the UN in the accession process, and also a smaller member states, how would you see the process, or what do we need to do in order to ensure that both processes will actually be successful?
Well, I think, first of all, if I may say so, I believe we have to be serious about enlargement. What by that I mean is, I think prior to the various crises we currently experience, prior to the war in Ukraine, there was a certain procrastination, dragging out of enlargement. I mean, if you think of countries like North Macedonia, Albania, Montenegro, others, who could have been ready a long time ago, were ready a long time ago, but Europe wasn't ready. And I think after the last large, big enlargement that I referenced, there was a sort of go slow, and time waits for no person. And in politics, timing is everything. You've got to seize the moment. But I'm always particularly conscious when I speak to members of parliament of countries who want to join the European Union, or who are on the side of the debate that's pro-European Union in given accession states. Their base is often sapped, their morale is sapped, and the support levels that they have in their respective countries is reduced by Europe not taking their application from their perspective seriously enough. So that's a very important point, I think, because when we talk about integration of new members and rule of law and so on, our prospects for better integration are enhanced if we move timely and effectively on the enlargement process and don't drag it out for the wrong reasons or for reasons that don't really stand up to objective scrutiny. That has been the reality for some member states. Secondly, I would say that the European Union, notwithstanding people's concerns about vetoes and everything else, in dealing with Brexit, in dealing with COVID, and in dealing with the war in Ukraine, in my opinion, has demonstrated its capacity to respond, albeit in emergency sort of situations, in a very cohesive way. So we shouldn't understate the response to COVID in particular. And I've said this earlier to the Parliament Committee, the unity of purpose. But first of all, the first ever time we collectively had a fund, the Next Generation funding. Now, it might have meant staying up till 7 a.m, as I did as Taoiseach at the time, to get agreement. But we got agreement. The work on the vaccine was particularly significant. I was a former Minister for Health in 2000 to 2004, experienced the SARS, didn't quite become a pandemic, but very serious at the time. Europe was at sea, no coordination, no cohesion, no partnership with industry, no prospect of a vaccine at that stage at all. So I was pleasantly surprised as Taoiseach in 2020-21 at the rapidity of the Commission's response, both in terms of the vaccine, the production, the manufacturing, the regulatory authorities. It was very effective, and I think was probably the strongest entity in the world in terms of not just vaccinating Europe, but other parts outside of Europe and the world more generally, which doesn't get acknowledged, and European Union can be poor. So that's at that point. Third point, yes, we do need to reform. And we do, and notwithstanding Ireland being a small state and having our reasons for vetoes, not just in terms of CFSB, but in other areas, I do accept that if we're a member, if we're a union in 10 years' time of 30-odd member states, that will require more effective decision-making processes. But I think we can be creative in that to enable such new mechanisms to emerge, and also to try and do it in the existing treaty would be ideal. So we'll see how the work that has been started by Minister Annalena and Germany in respect of that whole area.
Thank you. And if we look beyond the political process and look towards the population in Europe, also in Ireland, how do we get them on board when it comes to enlargement, but also reform? And of course, Ireland is perhaps an example when we look to the past treaty reforms, when it came to the Treaty of Lisbon and the referendum. So is there anything that we need to do in order to ensure that not only the political processes continue, but that we also can convince the people in Europe that both processes are now necessary and perhaps urgent?
I think this is an ongoing challenge for the Union because we tend to be very institution-focused, and very often there can be a gulf between the citizens and the institutions. So we have to work very, very hard to maintain the links with the citizen and people in respect to what we do every day within the European Union. And in many ways, the vaccination program was very real for people. They could see Europe working in terms of communications, roaming charges. There's lots of areas of European decision-making which benefits young people, the Erasmus program. So we can never stop working hard enough on communicating to the public and to people the benefits of the European Union. Complacency sets in very early on. We lost the first Lisbon referendum through complacency. Yes, there would have been some background issues that were sort of created a degree of apathy, perhaps. But what was interesting, and I was the director of elections for the second Lisbon referendum, not the first. Don't take responsibility quite for the first. But it was a great experience for me as a politician, because the economic clouds got actually darker. And I remember people pressing me saying, move, move, move. And I said, no, we're going to take our time with this. We're going to do due deliberation, a lot of research. Why did people vote no in the first referendum? And I remember it was Margaret Wallström was commissioner at the time, and she funded a lot of research and gave me a lot of support, because she was a great passionate believer in the idea of the citizen and the union being connected more. And so we understood better the rationale and the reasons, and some of what the opposition had put up. We were in a position to deal with in the second referendum, such as one commissioner per member state. Vote no and you keep your commissioner. So, okay. And Sarkozy at the time was of a mind, he didn't think France should be sharing, should lose out on a commissioner either. So he was facilitative on that one, but I was just one. But other issues around nationality and so on, we were able to deal with. But what the lesson for me was, you can never take any referendum for granted. And by the way, people say, oh, Ireland has to do a referendum for treaty change. That's an awful pain. It's very difficult. It's not. Like, on the whole, it's a great engagement with the people on Europe. We got our act together in the second referendum. We didn't have it together in the first referendum. Hard work, research, engagement with people works. Well, at least it did that time anyway, and I think it still will. But the positives of a referendum are you're engaging with the public on the matters. And when people are extremely busy with a whole lot of stuff going on, don't underestimate the importance of that exercise.
Thank you. And looking towards specific reforms that we might need to implement in order to prepare for enlargement, you have mentioned a QMV and the group of friends of QMV, and perhaps also introducing reforms within the treaties. But of course, even within the treaties, to use the passerelle clause, we need unanimity. And also to introduce QMV, would Ireland be on board with introducing QMV for foreign policy, but also if we talk about a larger package of policy areas that would move towards QMV, such as taxation, what would your stance be in that?
Personally, I'm open to QMV on foreign policy matters. I'm open to examining what measures can be adopted. I'm not speaking on behalf of all my government colleagues, to be fair. So just to give an example, in terms of the war in Ukraine, our government programme said that we could not, in our utilisation of the European Peace Facility fund, it would have to be non-lethal aid. There was an agreement between the three parties coming into government. But through the mechanism of constructive abstention, we can participate and facilitate the European Peace Facility Fund and contribute to non-lethal aid. So that's a creative way of allowing a country retain its position, if you like, from a policy perspective, without stopping the vast majority of the Union member states for doing what they believe is correct. So I do believe this work that's underway, we can look, there are creative ways that you can sort of facilitate effective decision-making, but also recognizing that certain member states will have reservations and will have challenges and difficulties. We can see in the Middle East, it's very difficult. I mean, one then would have to be very careful in the Middle East that a majority decision on that could be very problematic because there is a genuine division of opinion among member states. So, for example, 8 member states would have voted for the first Arab resolution at the UN. Others abstained, others would have been opposed to that. And others thought maybe they could be all abstain together. So there will be moments when you have to be realistic and acknowledge these realities. But if it's a case, what has happened with the veto, though, it's arguable too that the veto has been misused. And certainly it's very clear that the veto is now being used by some member states exclusively for their own self-interest in terms of particular issues that matter to that state, and not exactly the content of the issue that's being up for decision. And that's an abuse of the veto in our view. I think taxation is a very fundamental issue in a democracy. Goes to the very heart of it. We did participate in the OECD mechanism and agreed to changes in our corporate tax system in line with the OECD. And by the way, I would have received assurances on the EU side in terms of there wouldn't be a double whammy, so to speak, or a two-stranded approach, so that all the strands went via the OECD. So we would obviously be very conscious of the challenges on taxation.
Looking ahead towards this year, it's of course a big election year in the European Union, but also elsewhere in the world. And looking across the pond first, before we get to our own elections, there's of course a lot of concerns that we might get a potential second Trump presidency. Where do you see the role of the EU in the world as a global actor? And how can we prepare for a future in which the US is perhaps a less reliable partner than at the moment?
I think we have to roll with the punches, as they say in boxing terms. And we've got. I mean, first of all, and I don't want to comment on the internal political affairs of other countries and so on, but there's a certain almost gloomy sort of predictions coming out, which I think we all need to pause somewhat. This is an election year. It's wide open. Anything can happen in the presidential election in America. It's not a slam dunk at all. So there's a long way to go to November. So that's the first point. Second point is that the Biden administration certainly has worked effectively to restore the transatlantic relationship, and in particular, I think on climate has been very significant. I think in COP26 in Glasgow, one could feel the impact of the US's change in terms of the agreements that were arrived at in Glasgow on climate. There was a new impetus in the room, a major player was coming on board, and it has had impact on the global approach to climate change. The IRA Act, then, there's two ways of looking at that. One, like US under Biden has been protectionist too. But I think as Ursula von der Leyen would say, rather than Europe sort of totally just reacting negatively to that act, let's acknowledge that it's probably one of the biggest acts in the United States history in terms of embracing climate change, dealing with climate change. That's the positive side of it. I mean, if you looked at 4 years earlier, the idea of an act that would subsidize electric vehicles and really power the renewable agenda in America, it wouldn't have been thought possible. That's a positive. And then President von der Leyen would have said to us at the time, the challenges for Europe is to rise up to that and find how do we deal with that. And obviously there are issues, protectionism issues, that we have to deal with in respect of the certain sectors, auto and so on like that. We had to deal with the same, by the way, in vaccines. I mean, America had an export authorization ban at a particular time at the vaccine story. Europe kept open in terms of exports on vaccine ingredients, components, and the vaccines themselves, which is very, very important. We fought hard, Ireland did, to maintain that position. And it was a rocky period when we nearly went down the wrong road because production is a global phenomenon, particularly of vaccines. And I think we were vindicated subsequently on that stance. So what I mean, basically, I accept the democratic outcome of whatever happens next November. Our challenge then as a European Union is to respond to it. We need to do so with greater self-confidence. We tend to beat ourselves up a lot within the European Union. The European Union is a very powerful economic force in the world. We probably need to moderate our tone in our engagement with global partners. Many of our partners see us in the global south as a kind of a hectoring presence, do this, do that, so on. I think we need to moderate that, try and understand more where other people are coming from, where other countries are coming from, their history, their background, why they're not going to rush to the table with the same perspective that we have in Europe. And I think we'll get a greater understanding then as a result of that. So I just feel we need to go forward with self-confidence. It is challenging. I'm not going to pretend it will be challenging if certain events develop. But always remember, in politics, I'm acutely aware, and in history, there are limitations to power. Democratic power. there are limitations, and so I never get overly sort of panicky or fearful of what might transpire. Very often, people campaign in poetry and govern in prose.
So you say there's still a lot of time until November. Our own elections in June are a bit closer in the European Union. Looking towards the European Parliament elections, how do you think, or what topics do you think will be the ones that we really need to look at? What will be the topics that might drive the elections? And how optimistic are you about the outcomes? Because there's, of course, not just concerns about the elections in the US, but also concerns about how the elections in June will turn out in terms of pro-European parties, right-wing populism, and a general shift in Parliament.
I think in Ireland we should ask everyone in the population to read Prophet's Song. It's a novel by Paul Lynch, which won the Booker Prize. And why do I say that? I think we have to articulate better what we have, what we enjoy, the freedoms we enjoy as individuals and as societies. It's back to the complacency, take it for granted argument. And we really have to try and politically get that message across. This matters. Like Ireland values the European Union. One of the reasons the figures are so high is because of Brexit, actually. Brexit has been a huge sort of wake-up call to those who think that just leaving the European Union is easy, no impact on the people or the economy. We're watching what happened in the United Kingdom for the last number of years, and even in the United Kingdom, there were, I think, probably many people in the population are having second thoughts about it. But it actually galvanized Irish people even more towards the European Union. So politically, and what we'll be trying to say, look, we need people in the European Parliament who believe, first of all, in the ideal of the European Union, believe in its value, and that's who we should elect to the European Parliament. Not people who will spend all our time undermining the Union, knocking the Union, and trying to disrupt what the Union is at. That's important because the problem, even in our own country, the European Union, sometimes elections, parliamentary elections can be mini presidential elections, and personality takes over or particular issues take over. So we have to do better at communicating the value and the importance of the European Union to our people, and then to vote accordingly and create a vision for the European Union and our future within the European Union. We have to nominate strong candidates. I mean, personality matters in European elections, as in all elections, and connection to people between the person who's going forward and so forth. We do have to communicate, as I said, the positives of the European Union, but also then try and deal with the fears that people may stoke up in respect of the Union, what the Union is planning, the conspiracy theories, all that kind of thing needs to be knocked fairly strongly on the head in campaigning and so forth. From an Irish perspective, you know, I believe in the single market, the expansion of the single market. I think we need to emphasize the economic benefits of the Union and of the various aspects of the monetary union as well. Which has been beneficial, and also then highlight what we've done well.
Thank you, Tánaiste. I will open up there's many questions. The Q&A session, maybe we start here on the left and then we move towards the right. There is a microphone going around. I hope it's tested.
Thank you. Catherine Reeves from the Scottish Government, and thank you, Tánaiste, for a fascinating session. Just reflecting on Ireland's response to the war in Ukraine, from our perspective in Scotland, Ireland mounted what seemed to be a very prompt, very well-organised effort that allowed you to welcome a really significant number of Ukrainian refugees, as indeed did Germany. Could you reflect on how the process of integrating those refugees into society in Ireland is going, and any lessons that you would draw from that response?
Thank you for saying it was well organised. That's not as well articulated in Ireland sometimes. I say that in jest. Yeah, we took a decision early on to and historically we weren't as good at this, I think, as we are now, in terms of the Ukrainian situation. I think people were very taken by the scenes at the outset of the war, families being packed on trains, bombing of civilian infrastructure, and we decided to respond, as did the rest of Europe and Germany in particular. So, and there's many people voluntarily did it themselves, and the Irish Red Cross and then the government. And I think the integration piece, many local community organizations took up the challenge to integrate as quickly as possible. I think the education side of it was the best. I think our teachers, our schools took in many Ukrainian children quickly. And I think that has been very effective, and it's created challenges, but I think it's one of the better sides of what your legacy that transpired. And then in health services, many medics stood up to the challenge as well and helped. Many pro bono, I know this myself. Many citizens gave their properties to take in Ukrainian families. And then the state itself did the bulk of the lifting, but we had to procure hotels and various buildings to accommodate Ukrainians coming in. And then, of course, our social welfare system is quite strong. It's probably one of the strongest in the European Union. But now, if I'm honest, people perhaps didn't see the war lasting the length of time that it has. But there's still a warmth to the Ukrainian people. There's a challenge on the asylum-seeking side, on the more conventional migration pathways that is emerging, because obviously there's impact on accommodation with over 100,000, that's 2% of our population, Ukrainian refugees. And then the asylum-seeking, where it's not huge, it's at I think 14,000 last year, new arrivals. That's fivefold increase. So you can see the pressures in a society where we already had a housing crisis in terms of the need to build more houses. So that's creating challenges. I think the next phase will be stronger integration. Quite a number of Ukrainians work in our economy. We have full employment in our economy at the moment. But given that many are women and children, not all obviously can participate in the workforce. But we're doing what we can to facilitate greater integration into the workforce.
Maybe in the back, Joanna?
Hi. Thank you very much. As someone who lived and worked 23 years in Scotland and England, I really appreciate what you said about Britain. I do feel Brexit's been terrible for everyone, but it's now being a little bit too ignored, particularly the security aspects of it. I wanted to ask you, in both as somebody who's Minister of Foreign Affairs and Minister of Defense, and I should say I'm working in the technology policy area, so this is why I'm particularly interested. If you had any comments on whether you thought it has to be acknowledged the government was not helping all the citizens, and there's reasons why they voted against the government. But could you comment on whether there were, in your opinion, outside forces also from outside the EU that were looking to weaken the EU? And also, could you comment on whether you see anything similar happening with the remaining two G7 members in the EU?
First of all, may I say that on the British-Irish Council, which is part of the Good Friday Agreement, we meet with the First Minister of Scotland, the First Minister of Wales, British government representative twice a year, and all the islands, the Isle of Man and so on. And it's very kind of interesting because, of course, this perspective in Scotland and in Wales on Brexit was markedly different to that of the representatives from England. So I was quite struck by that, and the impact on Scotland, Holyhead, the traditional ports that Irish exports came through. I think it's down about, is it 20 to 30% in volume. So the First Minister in Wales was particularly concerned about that. In terms of, I definitely think there was external forces at play, and we're much more aware now. I mean, and remember, it only takes 5%, may only take 3 or 4% to swing a vote of that magnitude. I have no doubt that there are many interested parties externally who did what they could to push the vote towards a negative vote. It's very interesting in Ireland when we had, I think it's a referendum, on Lisbon. Like I was debating with Nigel Farage, like who was telling the Irish people what to do. But he managed to put a leaflet in every door in Ireland at significant cost. We had the Declan Ganley party, they were able to spend $1 million on a referendum. He himself was genuinely committed to an anti-Lisbon, which I accept, and he's entitled to his views. But I thought it was interesting in terms of that. And I remember debating with Nigel Farage and being at the time somewhat annoyed that this guy's coming in here telling us what to do, and not really, in my view, having the best interests of the Irish people at heart. So there's no doubt that there are forces out there, for whatever motivation, seek to create new paradigms or undermine the union. And then there are other state actors, and we know this now, are increasingly active online. Misinformation is a phenomenon now, disinformation is a phenomenon. In our new electoral laws, in the new electoral commission we've established, we've put in provisions now to see, can we deal with that? At least alert people, that the commission would have authority to alert people to a clear misleading trend, for example, that has no basis in fact on social media or whatever. But we do need to be very attentive to that entire area.
Perhaps to the right, and if you could briefly introduce yourselves also.
Yes. Hi, I'm Sebastian. I'm an MPP student here at the Hertie School, and I was wondering, since we are living in an age of democratic backsliding, and it's highly likely that at least over the longer course, some democracies will also become quite fundamentally undemocratic within the EU, should we, if we are now pushing for more accession, also create mechanisms that we can perhaps unilaterally remove countries from the EU if they break bad, as one says?
Yeah, I think that's worth exploring. I wouldn't say no to that. But it would be very difficult in real time and real terms, because you're faced with that dilemma. You want to keep the union together, and sometimes you have to think beyond the government of the day. You have to think of the people of the country. So you're not just expelling a government from the European Union. You would be expelling people from the European Union. And in many respects, the European Union gives rights to citizens over and above their government, if you get my drift. So I'm always very conscious of that. So in some of the debates we've had on Hungary and Poland in the last number of years, I was always very conscious that there are people there who love the European Union, want to be part of the freedoms, the liberal ethos that, in terms of democracy and so on. So just have to be very conscious of that too. But there are limits to what we should put up with. I think generally the consensus model works, always trying to understand why people are coming to a particular position, what are the motivations and so forth. We've had some challenging moments with LGBT in Hungary and Poland, and I was at EU Council meeting where there was a very, very robust, put it mildly, debate on that issue. But again, I was thinking of those communities in those countries and what is best for those communities to enable them to hold on to their rights. Sort of taking punitive action could be counterproductive. There's a debate to be had there. Like Brexit, it was very interesting. Guy Verhofstadt, I can recall, I'm part of the Renew Group. At the time of Brexit, to the Renew Group made a very, very good, insightful point. Very early on, he said, how do we keep young British people in Erasmus? When everyone is saying we must, and the early phase was punish. We can't have any other country doing a Brexit. He was, I think, far-sighted enough to say, well, actually, the young people of Britain didn't vote for this. We can't abandon them. And we should be open and generous and say, no, whatever you do, please let your young people are more than, we're more than happy that your young people should continue to participate in the Erasmus programs and the various education mobility programs in Europe. And I thought that was a very insightful kind of way of thinking, more future, long term. The wheel changes and times changes, so it's an option. But I would always think of that. You get my drift as to the way I think about it, or would think about it.
Let's perhaps take a question from the middle.
Hi, Gabriel Kappa, International Affairs student. We've just celebrated the 25th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement last year. But since Brexit, with Stormont in deadlock and with sort of stirring paramilitary forces in Northern Ireland, it's looking quite strained. I was just wondering, going forward for the next 25 years, how do you see the agreement evolving? How do you see Anglo-Irish relations evolving? And what should the EU's role be in negotiating what will probably be change within that period? Thank you.
Yeah, I think there's no doubt that Brexit has had a negative impact on the Good Friday Agreement and has had a negative impact on the institutions in the Good Friday Agreement. And part of the reason was people who conceived of Brexit did not think of the Good Friday Agreement. They were oblivious to the impact on the Good Friday Agreement. Hence, all of the subsequent challenges around protocols and the Windsor Framework and all of that. It's clear evidence that people did no homework on this and frighteningly were oblivious to the consequences for Northern Ireland of the Brexit decision and did no homework in advance. In terms of, and so it has created challenges which the paramilitary challenge isn't perhaps as we would argue as strong as you might be indicating there, but there has been worrying sort of rioting and so on at an earlier stage. But we see the problem in terms of the institutions of the Good Friday Agreement and getting that back. That is the big casualty of Brexit right now. In terms of evolution, I developed when I was Taoiseach or Prime Minister from 2020 to up to 2022, the Shared Island Initiative. And the idea being that we must unite people, or we must, look, irrespective of the political consideration and without prejudice to people's constitutional preferences, we do need to work together on the island and find ways of working together, which we're doing. And so the Shared Island is a €1 billion fund to 2030 to do cross-border projects that facilitates reconciliation, facilitates communities coming together in the arts, in infrastructure, and a whole range of areas. It's been very successful. There's a dialogue strand. We've had thousands of people, young people in particular, meeting in dialogue to discuss the island of the future. Issues like, for example, biodiversity and climate networks on the island, which we didn't have, but we now fund that. We have an all-island women's network. So the idea being that let's get on with the normal things of life and let's underpin that. And that's where the European Union's Peace Fund is very significant, because that gives a further billion because what happens is Europe allocates, the United Kingdom government by far gives the largest amount of money, but it's a multiplier of what the EU gives, and we do the same. With the result that you have a very substantial fund for sort of what we call peace or reconciliation initiatives. That is very, very important that we keep doing that and we keep resourcing that, because that is the underpinning of societal cohesion. The problem with the institutions not being up and running is creating huge frustration with politics in Northern Ireland. It's very interesting in all of the surveys over the last 30 years, the contrast between the Scottish Assembly and perceptions of the Scottish Assembly, which were quite high after independence, and Northern Ireland, which was quite low because of the stop-start nature, different parties at different times collapsing it for political reasons. I do believe there should be change and reform in respect of after elections, no one should have a veto in terms of the convening of the Assembly or the formation of an executive. And I believe once this vote is validated and the Assembly is brought back, what should happen, there should be all-party talks with the two governments to at least reform those mechanisms. Because I think there was a reason for that community veto 25 years ago. I think we need to take courage in our hands now. There's a more fragmented polity in Northern Ireland. What's happening now is emerging centre-ground parties are finding themselves frustrated by the framework, which is not enabling them to have their vote reflected in Parliament. And I think that is the next step. in terms of the evolution of politics in Northern Ireland.
I see 2 more hands raised. Sasha first.
Hi, my name is Sasha Ostanin. I'm a security policy fellow at the Jacques Delors Centre. And I have a follow-up question on EU security mechanisms. There is a lot of momentum at the moment at the EU to increase, improve, adjust security mechanisms, such as the European Peace Facility. There is also an upcoming European national defense industry strategy. How do you assess those changes, and whether you think that the EU should be more aggressive in getting a larger security agenda, larger security actions into its hands?
Well, from the Irish perspective, we are essentially peacekeepers. So we contribute to many peacekeeping, well, in particular in Lebanon at the moment, we're in Kosovo. So interoperability is very important to us. So these defence reforms are important, and investment in defence capability is important, and efficiency in procurement is important. So we're open to working with the European Defence Agency on that front, although it's not as strong as people suggest, as you know. And it's interesting that I think Thierry Breton and others are working on the European defence industry and trying to make it more cohesive, particularly in the context of the Ukraine war. And it's much slower than perhaps they might have anticipated in putting all of that together. And so there is no doubt that increased investment in capability is important, but I think from a European perspective, interoperability is particularly important, and commonality in terms of equipment and various, in terms of the actual, you take your helicopters, you take your ships. Very often, if you look at Europe compared to China, compared to the US, it's very, very fragmented in Europe. And much less so in China or in the US. So that sort of idea of coherence and interoperability. So we're with Poland at the moment in UNIFIL. We share the same. I mean, it makes absolute sense that there's common experience with similar mechanisms and weaponry and so on like that in a peacekeeping environment. And in the future, Ireland will essentially be peacekeeping or peace enforcement. That's where we see our role. We do see a change. We're looking at the idea of, and it's called the triple lock in Ireland, which means you need a UN mandate, Security Council mandate to participate in the peacekeeping mission. But given the degree of paralysis on the Security Council, there's now a growing debate saying, why should we allow Russia veto Ireland's participation in a peacekeeping mission? So that's something I'm bringing forward. I don't have total agreement within the Parliament, to be honest. But I'm sort of a view that we should push that through, because that's something we can contribute as a small nation to the world.
I think we have about 1 minute left. If you agree, I will take one last question on my right.
Hi, my name is Caden Rock. I'm a transatlantic master's student at UNC Chapel Hill and Humboldt University. And since we are in Berlin...
Rock, is it? Yeah.
Rock, it is, yeah.
R-O-C-K, yeah.
Yes.
Great footballers in Ireland called Rock. Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
He just retired from the Dublin football team.
Very much aware of that, yes. Since we are in Berlin, a formerly divided city, I was wondering if you could maybe expand on the question that was posed earlier. Maybe could go into the prospect of an eventual Irish reunification, and maybe possibly that Brexit has presented as some sort of shift in the historic trajectory of the popular perspective on that question.
My party is the Fianna Fáil party. We believe in the unity of the Irish people, and we come from the Wolfe Tone tradition of 1798, and he's often quoted phrase of uniting Catholic, Protestant, and dissenter, kind of informed our approach. So what does that mean? It means that unity has to be about people. And in a situation with perhaps Germany and Ireland is not quite, to be compared to different historical backgrounds to it. But essentially, the challenge in Ireland, I would argue historically, is we never faced up to the fact that we had a significant number of people in Northern Ireland who saw their allegiance to the United Kingdom. And so that was kind of postponed in the 1922 Anglo-Irish Treaty. People felt there was an inevitability that the North would come in, it couldn't survive on its own. And so the big issue in the Civil War in Ireland and the war and the treaty was about the oath of allegiance to the king and separatism, as in the ideal of a separate republic. Those who opposed the treaty felt that that was being undermined by the treaty, etc. And I don't want to go into all that, but the point being that it really took the Good Friday Agreement to once and for all deal with that issue as best we could, around parity of esteem for two communities, protection and guardrails for each community in the new assembly, that one community couldn't be brushed aside or issues could be steamrolled against the interests of a given community, be it the nationalist community or the unionist community. Now that has evolved over time, and there's new generation emerging as well who see themselves more centre ground, who see themselves as Northern Irish. So my approach is we must keep on working on uniting people. And that's hard work that needs to be done every day of the week. And that's why the Shared Island initiative was conceived. And it was the late Seamus Mallon, who was an SDLP member, who said that his neighbour had arrived, or his neighbour's people had arrived 400 years earlier. You might call them planters or whatever. But he said, they're here now 400 years. It's about time I learned how to share this plot of ground with them. And so that's the thinking behind the Shared Island. And ultimately, whatever configuration, and politics will emerge, will evolve in Northern Ireland. Configurations will come. There will be changes to structures. If we don't have the people happy and comfortable in each other's space, you just have new tensions in new configurations. What really gives you the foundation for a new Ireland and a good future in Ireland is making people comfortable in each other's space. And so that's my mission, and that's the work I'm at. And I think Europe can help in that regard. And we're now going through a period of setback. I think the two governments equally, Brexit has affected that relationship. And what made the Good Friday Agreement was the two governments working in lockstep together, totally transparent with each other, and working with the political parties in Northern Ireland with total focus. That lapsed with Brexit, to be frank, and that's something we've got to restore. The two governments have to restore and work on that. So I hope I've given you my sense of it, we can't, it's not about threatening or telling people your day is over or whatever like that. That's gone, we've got to work together. And I think we showed it in the Good Friday Agreement. We need to rediscover that spirit and really work. And if the people if our mission is the benefit of the people, the welfare of the people, it will follow naturally in terms of political decision making.
So I think our time is up. Thank you so much, Tánaiste, for being here and for this fascinating discussion on so many different topics regarding Europe's future and Ireland's role in it. So I think